Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen. I wanted to talk a little bit this week about Afghanistan, and I also started picking Steve's brain about the politics in Canada. We had our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announce an election coming up in the fall. And the policy for climate change is ubiquitous across party lines. And I mentioned to Steve, I said, it's like a veil has been lifted from my perception. Thanks to Steve, I understand that the threat of climate change is very real. I think everybody understands that. But the contamination at play, I think, with the politicians is something that has been informed by the economists. And without that underpinning information from Steve, it's now like the dots are kind of being connected. Does that resonate, Steve, at all? Like,
yeah, I mean, as I've told you, I've been criticizing neoclassical economics for 50 years now. This is the 50th anniversary of me becoming a critic of mainstream economics in first year at university when I was 18. And in that entire time, I've never read anything as bad as the garbage that neoclassicals pump out on climate change. And the point that's just come back to my mind this morning is that there was a criticism of the teaching mechanisms or methods for economics written about 20 years ago by a number of prominent economists, slightly to the left of the usual change. One of them was David Colander. Now, I'm going to search and see if I can find it while we talk. But he talked about how the training methods, particularly, of course, in America, the training method for American economists was likely to turn out a bunch of idiot savants who were great at manipulating the models and completely divorced from the real world. Well, I've never seen a greater bunch of idiot savants than the people who are getting active in climate change. And I've just seen another example of this last week, which just, if I wasn't already flabbergasted with this lot to take my breath away, somebody who's had a bit of a track record for being more of a realist, this is Jono Wagner, who's a follower from the work of Weitzman and actually talks about tipping points. You know, one of the things I've criticized the neoclassicals for is not including tipping points in their models. Well, they can now say we've done it. Look at what Verno and Dietz and Wagner have done. Well, I have looked at what Dietz and Wagner have done, and it's the same fucking shit. And pardon me, there's no other way I can. I'm just so disgusted with this lot. And yet what's going to happen is when anybody challenges the proposals by more radical groups and says, oh, look, you're not taking account tipping points. Oh, yes, we are. We're using Dietz and Wagner 2021, and that covers tipping points. So we're done. Aren't we great? Well, you know, I'll elaborate on that as we talk about Afghanistan as well. But the way that they've included tipping points is by changing the quadratic that is used by Nordhaus to another quadratic. And tipping points, by definition, involve a change in the slope of a function. Now, when you have a quadratic, if it's y equals ax squared, where y is the damage to the economy and x is the temperature, then the slope of that is 2 times a times x. It's a straight bloody line. It never changes. And yet that's what they've done to include tipping points. They're including a change in the slope of the damage function by having a function with no change in its slope. And this is just typical of this lot.
Well, I'm surprised that no one calls them out. Since peer review is the name of the game, you'd think that someone would make a name for themselves by correcting someone on an interview on a news station.
That's not what happens in economics. Peer review in economics is being validated by your peers. And they fall over themselves to approve stuff like this. And what they look for is really how technically complicated your work is. So make an outrageous assumption and then build a crystal castle on top of it. That's the name of the game in economics. And this particular paper is a classic example of that. It's incredibly complicated econometrics, all sorts of things incorporated in terms of, they've got 7 different tipping points they look at, each calibrated, each estimated its impact on the social cost of carbon. They cover interactions between them all. And what does it come down to? 6-degree increase in temperature, the damage caused by adding tipping points to not having tipping points is another 1.4% fall in GDP. And I love this, the level at which GDP disappears is I've got to get this right, it's very precise, a 17.68 degrees increase, Celsius, increase in temperature over pre-industrial levels.
What?
Yes, exactly. 17.68 degrees Celsius. Not 0.67, not 0.69, 17 degrees. I mean,
we'd be melted.
Absolutely. There'd be no life left on the planet. The only life we'd have left would be thermophiles. That'd be it. And yet, if you look at like even a more outrageous level, like a 10-degree increase in temperature, that would reduce GDP by 32% over what it would be in the absence of climate change, including tipping points. And this is the sort of crap they pump out, and you look at it saying, don't even you realize how absurd this is? If your methods are returning numbers like this, there's something wrong with your methods. But no, they keep on going.
Let me change the theme here just slightly. I'm curious what you would think about a couple terms. One is the Thomas Kuhn of a paradigm shift, and also with the idea that, I mean, you're a self-identified contrarian. I mean, that's what it is. You're a contrarian. Now, if what you bring into light with your contrarian types of positions into the mainstream, if it becomes mainstream, are we witnessing a paradigm shift from your work?
Oh, absolutely. If I manage to have my approach to economics become the dominant, then that would be a classic paradigm shift, because just as a few points, my analysis is monetary, theirs is barter based. Mine is non-equilibrium, far from equilibrium. There is equilibrium fixated. They have no role for the physical world in their production systems. They literally, and most of the time, they're using what's called a Cobb-Douglas production function, where output is used by combining labour and capital alone. No need for any energy input, no need for any materials input. Mine is fundamentally biophysically related. So without any energy input, you have zero output. So yes, it'll be a paradigm shift. But the trouble is, a paradigm shift in a standard science, this is one of the things that Kuhn emphasizes, comes about, and this comes from Max Planck's observations as well, not because the current paradigm is proven to be wrong to the current practitioners who then change their approach to a new way, but they can never get their heads around the new way. And you've got to wait for them to die, retire and die, and be replaced by people who do accept the new paradigm. That doesn't happen in economics.
His quote is a little bit more elegant, but I know the quote. Scott and
I have a question regarding the melting planet scenario.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that the smart, pro-social ruling class members would try to tame or domesticate the short-term profit, world-destroying idiots and say, hey, I mean, you have a good mafia ethics. Don't you want your descendants to have a good environment? Yeah. Isn't it worth a decrease in short-term profits and make sure that your selfish DNA descendants, they'll benefit from a planet that's not melted? Don't you think? So why not these like Democrat-leaning pro-socialist capitalists, the ones that realize that you can't totally immiserate the working class and destroy the planet because there'll be problems like revolution and so on? Why don't they? Can't they manage these petroleum, whoever it is that are funding these propagandists disguised as the economists that are saying it's okay?
You don't need to fund these bastards. They self-fund. That's my one point. They're not paid to come up with this crap. They believe it in the first place. So it isn't so much funding; it's removing the funding structures from them that would matter. But yeah, I take your point. I mean, there will have to be members of the ruling elite, and you might regard Elon Musk as a sort of example of that. And anybody who's thinking we've got to do something to avoid extinction. And at the moment, of course, the only people are doing that are looking at getting off the planet. If you instead had a bunch saying we've got to stay, well, no, if we're going to survive as a species, we do have to get off planet, frankly. There's no way we can sustain an advanced civilization without destroying the biosphere. We've proven that already. The Soviet system would have done not quite as badly, but probably as badly. If you've seen any of the environmental damage of the Soviet system, it isn't just capitalism that I blame for this sort of thing. But I think what it's going to take is something of a catastrophic scale. So I don't mean like a storm that wipes out a village in Germany and kills 200 people. I'm thinking a storm that destroys the Netherlands, something like that. Okay, and this is not, unfortunately, it's a hyperbolic statement right now, but it wouldn't take a hyperbolic outcome to occur in the sense that we know that one of the things that's also been scaring me recently is the decline in the strength of what's called the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which most people know as the Gulf Stream. And that's responsible for something like about a 5 degrees Fahrenheit increase in the temperature of Europe over what it would be without the heat transfer from the equator to the northern Atlantic. And that is weakening substantially and very rapidly, and it's scaring some of the scientists who thought it wouldn't actually happen until we hit about 3 degrees warming and sometime next century. They're now saying, well, it's happening, it could be happening now and it could stop. According to The Economist, that would improve the GDP. Okay? I'm not joking. That's in Richard Toll's paper.
Do they have an argument for that?
Yeah, simple. This is what throws me about this bunch. As a debating tactic, it's like the smarmiest, most irritating bunch of ruling class twerps you can imagine making a case for a debate. First of all, they say that you can use today's temperature and GDP relationship to predict the impact of climate change. Okay, so Florida's 20% poorer than Maryland, and the temperature difference is 10 degrees. So a 10-degree increase in temperature will reduce GDP by 20%. And in fact, I'll give Gurno credit. He says a 10-degree would reduce it by 32%. That's actually a bit better. And what they're really saying fundamentally is temperature is a trivial determinant of income now. Therefore, they're saying the temperature will be a trivial determinant of income in the future. But then they make up models. They make up models where temperature is the only thing that changes GDP in the future relative to what it would be without. Okay, it is a terribly bad intellectual argument, but that's what they do.
So you're saying that they'll look at temperature change, but it'll only factor into something like, well, it'll be a sunnier, warmer climate, so actually workers will be more productive because they won't be spending so much time bundling up and all this. Is that?
That's partially. I mean, in the case of what they say in the case of like warming in general is that warming will reduce the GDP overall, and because the AMOC will reduce the temperature, that will counteract the overall effect of climate change. So losing AMOC will mean that there's a smaller change in temperature than it'd otherwise be for Europe, and therefore, because Europe's a major production basis for the planet, a major source of planetary GDP, therefore losing the AMOC will reduce the damages from climate change.
I got to put my hand up. I got to put my hand up here and say, am I missing something? That there's a difference between temperature change and climate? Is that a point?
No, there's a major difference. The temperature is only one of the many manifestations. I mean, with some of the storms you've seen in this year. I mean, the storm that killed 200 people in Germany, washing away a village. The one in Tennessee a couple of days ago, where I think something like about 20 inches of rain fell in about 2 hours out of the blue. There was no warning for it because it was a small storm. It didn't even turn up in the weather models. So this and equally also you have a change in the distribution of temperature. So and this is what throws me about these guys. They're treating it, and this is a weather economist, Daniel Swain, meteorologist, made this point in replying to Toll. He said, you simply can't treat climate change as just adding a set number of degrees of temperature everywhere. And this is the AMOC's a case of that, because the AMOC transfers heat from the equator to the north of the northern hemisphere. If you shut it down, you don't change the heat of the whole planet one iota. What you do is you increase the heat of the equator and reduce the heat of the northern sections. That means there's a bigger temperature gradient between the two. Now, one thing that drives storms is temperature gradients. And my first reaction to this was, shit, if the AMOC shuts down, it won't just be that Europe gets a bit colder. It'll be that it could experience superstorms driven by a temperature gradient, which would now be potentially 3 degrees higher, maybe 4 degrees higher than it would have been without the AMOC breaking down. And I thought, well, I can think that, but I know I'm an economist, unlike these fuckwits who think they're meteorologists and climate and planet designers as well. I know my limitations. So I said, surely somebody's researched this. And the somebody I found, James Hansen, the original person who warned about the Manao, the potential. He's been doing it for 50 years. And in 2016, he published a paper about some of the impacts of these changes, saying 2 degrees is incredibly dangerous. And one of them was, if you shut down the AMOC while having the temperature rise we're talking about, then you return us to the conditions, I think, called the Eemian period in the paleontological record. And during that period, one of this particular paper in 2016 identifies a range of boulders, which are mainly in Ireland, I believe, weighing over 1,000 tonne. Now, normally things that big are washed up by tsunamis, but these things were washed up by normal storms in that climate. In other words, we're talking waves which could be 100 feet high, Now
I understand. So I have a clear understanding now. So actually, factually, the change in the Gulf Stream will offset the temperature increase in Europe, but it'll wreak havoc in the equator. So it'll be like mudslide, tsunami, and Hurricane City at the equator. But these managers don't live near the equator, so it doesn't really...
No. It'll be waves and mudslides and stuff in Europe. Okay, because when you look at it, the temperature increase around the equator, I mean, the equator's increased less than most of the rest of the planet. When you look at where the extreme changes in temperature, the increase in temperatures come, it's mainly been the northern regions. So if you do it like a straight line from 0 to 90 degrees of the temperature change, and the average so far is about a 1 degree across the whole planet, between 1 and 1.5 degrees, then you might find it's about 0.75 or 0.5 at the equator and 2 degrees at the pole. Now, what this is going to do is tip it back a bit the other way, but with an added global temperature as well. So you might find that the sort of 0.5 at the equator becomes 1. The pole could still be massively positive, okay, the polar regions, but the subpolar, the 30 to 60 degree range, that's what is affected largely by the AMOC. Now that could dip, so you could actually have like a parabola in terms of temperature changes. You'd have like 1 or 2 degrees at the equator, maybe 0 or -1 degrees, and it is only just for sake of illustration, at the 30 to 60 degrees, and then 5 or 10 at the pole. So what you're going to get, this is an enormous temperature gradient either side of the 30 to 60 range, and that implies energy transfer from the equator to the subpolar and above tropical levels. And it could. I'm banking. It's one reason I'm staying in Thailand. Okay, I'm banking on the worst impacts of this occurring in the 30 to 60 degree region. And if that does mean superstorms, then quite possibly we could talk storms which would be large enough to flatten any system of dikes, including the ones that currently protect my house in Amsterdam, 3 meters below sea level. Okay, and if we get storms like that coming along, then we could have an event, and this is just a hypothetical, where a superstorm wipes out Benelux, the lowlands. 20, 30 million people die in one storm. that would wake up your realistic capitalist who wants to pass on the mafia cup to his subsequent generations. But I don't think anything less than that's going to do it. I think we'll continue fumbling on, believing this nonsense, hoping, wishing to believe it too, until something like it happens, and then we'll wake up.
Well, it's not like we don't know it's possible. If we look at other planets, we can see that the by several orders of magnitude, storms do act like that. I mean, I don't know if that, I don't know what kind of other examples we have to.
You go back in the paleontological record. That's what. Right. I've got to see if I can find that work by. I'll just go and take a look in my subdirectories here. Hang on a second.
Are you scared, Steve, that that the equator zones that you're talking about, particularly maybe even where you live, is going to be? I mean, it's going to be hotter, but drier, more uninhabitable, more prone to drought. I mean, it's kind of getting you no matter where you live in the world. But
yeah, I think the worst instability is going to be this is my guess. I mean, this is a planet we've never been on before, as a species, and we're doing ludicrous. We're doing geoengineering. Okay? Let's be frank about we're doing uncontrolled geoengineering on this planet, and so we really don't know. But my guess is that given that tendency that the largest increase in temperature tend to occur at the poles rather than at the equator, then there'll be less of a rise around here. There'll still be parts which are already so close to being deadly, as you know, Kim Stanley Robinson's novel starting with a wet bulb temperature catastrophe in India. But the thing is, the extreme changes could well be in the 30 to 60 band, and certainly in the interface between the temperate zone and the polar, and the sort of the heat dome stuff we've seen so far, and I think also once it starts happening, we're going to go into even more geoengineering. There'll be rogue. Even if you don't have agreements, there'll be rogue attempts to reverse the damage we're doing, sulfur dioxide seeding and that sort of stuff. And overall, I think I'm safer here than I am in Europe.
Well, here's a silly question. How do you motivate a large industrial country like China to join the carbon tax idea?
I'm no great fan of carbon tax. You have to motivate them to get off coal. That's what you mean, and get off fossil fuels. And again, a catastrophe of that scale is the sort of thing you need. So if you look at the Yangtze River, ever been to Beijing? To Shanghai? Okay. Shanghai is on a tributary of the Yangtze. Okay? I think it was called the Bund, and the Bund is about half a kilometre wide most of the way through Shanghai. The Yangtze at that scale is about 20 kilometres wide on the other side. Now, if you had one of these superstorms hitting parts of the Yangtze further up, particularly, and we also have seen a storm like that in China. Of course, that was about 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. If that storm is so bad that it destroys a mega city, and we talk, China has 3 scales of cities. I think it's below 2 million, 2 to 10, and 10 plus. So you could take out a city of 10 million with one of these Greek storms. And if that happened, then the Chinese leadership would flip instantly. And because they've got a central command system in that country, they could instantly say, right, we're going off carbon. So I frankly have more expectation of significant change in China than I've got in any so-called Western democratic country.
Yeah, there is somebody who talks about collapse, global economic collapse. I'll bring his name up, but he's part of the Consilience Project, and he talks about he talks about there's 2 kinds of civilizations that are present in a global collapse. One that is described as chaotic, and the other one that's described as authoritarian.
Yeah. So
a couple of guesses on what America is versus what China is. Which
chaotic versus authoritarian, and in this situation, authoritarian command's going to do better.
Well, that's his point. He said time and time again through history, the authoritarian in collapse has done better.
Yeah, and that's what I expect this time around.
Well,
And that's,
I guess here's a broader question. Is there anything that you can imagine besides a real catastrophe that would motivate any of the ruling classes in any of these countries to voluntarily reduce their profit for the sake of saving the planet, like an incentive-based system or some international consortium, like centralized planning type idea? I mean, how do you get these people to join into something that is it would just decrease their profit? Is there any incentive trick that you could think of?
Well, the one I've thought of is universal carbon credits and a dual currency system. So you'd have everything would have its carbon content as well as its price stated on its packaging. When you bought something, you'd pay the money price and the universal carbon credit price. UCCs to be distributed per capita. And you could set them, say, at the average for a country. So the average person would benefit, and that means 95% of the population would have more universal carbon credits than they need. The top 5% would need to buy off the bottom 95%. And that would then both make it be a very popular move culturally, because most of the population would benefit from it, and substantially. The poorer you were, the more you would benefit. And secondly, the pressure on the rich, the amount they'd be losing and having to buy universal carbon credits off the poor, would be a major incentive to decarbonize the economy. So that'd work, but I can't see that being brought in until after a catastrophe.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about Afghanistan. I've sort of derailed things, haven't I?
Yeah, we wanted to talk about Afghanistan, but before I get there, earlier on today, Scott and I were talking about course creation, and I know, Steve, you and I talked about that just briefly. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things, the to-do list that you like to do, and then in the spirit of the Max Planck quote, I'm envisioning something where we can educate the people so that when the younger generation, so that when we're no longer here, they have something to work with. Is that something you'd like to get involved with? I know we're...
Of course. I mean, the trouble is, I'm doing all... thank God for Patreon, because without it, I would be living on a retirement income back in Australia, and doing this as much as I can manage in my spare time. With Patreon, I can do this full time, but there's no way. I'm writing my new book coming out next month, or the month after next, October, the New Economics Manifesto. I'm writing a manual for my Minsky software as well, which is also sort of a way to develop a new paradigm in economics. And I would love to be developing the teaching materials for that as well. But, I need 5 or 6 clones to be able to do it. The minimum I'd need is be able to hire about 20 colleagues, 10 people I could name off the top of my hat, and another 10 we'd pick from up and comings to build the sort of research center that's needed to develop all that stuff. And I haven't got the money, and I certainly won't get it from the mainstream funding group, because guess what? The referees are neoclassical.
Yeah. Any ideas, Scott?
Oh, no. I had some economics questions I was going to ask, but if today's topic is Afghanistan, let's go ahead down that road.
Oh.
Okay.
Let's move on. Scott, you're kind of got a standing appointment here to come and jump in anytime, with the group here. So, and that, the economic questions can kind of come at any point. Afghanistan, the pullout of America from this country, the destabilization of this country, the horrific things that we're seeing in the news. Steve, what are your thoughts about, this being the first of a destabilization that may send messages to other countries that, America's not that, policing country anymore, and maybe China may feel like extending its borders, or any other country for that matter?
Oh, I think this should have happened back with Vietnam. What did America learn out of Vietnam? Bugger all. You still had the belief they could project their power anywhere and intervene anywhere and blow things up without building replacements, and the world would be a better place. And this is another, just to I mean, I saw a wonderful statement by Julian Assange saying the idea is not to win the war, the idea is permanent war, because that provides a cash flow for the military-industrial complex in America. And the real winners of the Afghan war were the American and British arms manufacturers, and they're the real losers of the peace. So long as you have a major part of capitalism that is based upon the sale of weapons to shoot and others, then that pressure is always going to be there, and they're going to have the ear of the government through the strength of the military in virtually every society. So what we'd have to learn is that we need to reduce the scale of military actions everywhere on the planet, and that's the last thing America wants to do.
And who doesn't have some arms manufacturers in their portfolio? And those companies are responsible to their shareholders to maximize profits. So don't we all kind of benefit a little bit when there's a war? I mean, everyone's getting that grandma over there is getting some dividends from Boeing. So I mean, isn't it good that that's happening?
Yeah, and that's the trouble. I mean, we are so far removed from that conflict, and the whole idea. I mean, the whole idea of going to Afghanistan is sort of every country that's tried to defeat Afghanistan has walked away with its tail between its legs. From the and not just the Russians are the most obvious recent example, and the Americans helped undermine the Russian invasion, but the Mujahideen, apparently the Afghan national anthem has 14 tribal names in it. So I saw today. It's a tribal system, and people have incredible loyalty to their tribe. And frequently that comes with incredible animosity to other tribes. So to hold it together, even as a nation state, is an achievement. I think we can go into that and subjugate and turn into a bunch of nice little Western, middle-class consumer types. It's just ludicrous.
That's right. Yeah, Americans can't understand why anyone wouldn't want to have the luxury of taking Prozac and watching sitcoms every day. That's the most fulfilling experience you could possibly have.
I know. I mean, trouble is America doesn't get out enough. The Americans, their capacity to think they live in the best country in the world is a bit of a laugh from my point of view. Unfortunately, it's an expensive laugh for the rest of the world. But you'd hope they're going to learn. But of course, what's going to come out is different tactics and different weapon systems and that sort of thing. I don't think there'll be any long-term learning while you still have the same basic power structure in position in America.
I wanted to. Now this is a bit of an awkward. It's a bit of an awkward framing and question, though, Steve. I think that there's a direction from the left. If we're gonna frame this from a left and a right, conservative versus Democrat sort of perspective. The group that seems to be associated with the climate is more or less the left, and the conservatives is really where the denial and the big business and stuff come from, right? So what I've been playing around with conceptually here is that how feasible is it that the world can actually come together in a unified sort of government regulative all tides rise cooperative sort of way, when actuality we may really be on a pathway to nation states, preservation of individual nations and warring tribe-like tendencies.
Yeah, I think in some ways, one of the reasons that if you saw the wonderful video where some investigative journalists managed to persuade a couple of coal lobbyists in Washington that they were looking for business and they wanted to see how successful they'd been. And these guys, one of the things they said, well, we've supported carbon taxes because we know they're not going to happen. Okay, and that's been very effective for the oil and coal lobby that they're funded by. And equally, international agreements are a great way to make sure nothing happens. The only time international agreements work is in the after, either when you've got like a war, like the First and Second World War, after which you get things like the League of Nations and the United Nations, where looking back at the horror we've been through before, then you do have at least lip service to the idea of international cooperation. But you don't get that before the crisis. And when this one hits, I mean, we're certainly seeing the beginnings of climate breakdown with the ridiculous storms of the last and wildfires of the last 2 years. If we get something which was truly monumental, I mean, not just wiping out a village, but wiping out a city, then you might get people's attention. And it wouldn't get it the first time. It's a bit like two atom bombs on Japan. It would take a couple of these, and then holy shit, this is serious. Well, then the initial reaction, if it happens in the global south, I could see the global south going rogue. Like India is big enough, industrially competent enough to decide it's going to produce a fleet of SO2 seeding planes and fly up into the stratosphere and drop the global temperature by 4 degrees.
Holy shit.
That's quite feasible. India could do it if they wanted to. And if a catastrophe happened in India and Pakistan, I'm not sure about Pakistan's technical capabilities. I'm quite sure of India's capacity to pull that off. But if it happens in the northern hemisphere, and that's, I mean, there's still the fact that the craziest global temperature was 49.6 degrees in Lytton, Canada, earlier this year. If you instead see this catastrophe happening first in one of the northern hemisphere nations, then you might get we need to get into this all together type response. I couldn't see, like France, for example, going rogue on that front.
Scott, Steve's point. Now, I don't know if you feel like jumping in here, but I'm thinking of Hegel in terms of the repetitive, cyclical nature of history, and the fallout of a major war or conflict, bringing about the kind of change that we saw earlier in history with the world wars and then subsequent large mass conflicts. Do you have any Hegelian kind of insight into that, or philosophical insights into that comment?
No, but I got excited about this idea of 100 wars in 100 years. America is always trying to start wars over anything just to be able to give money to their contractors and in the military industrial complex. And I thought, who is that intellectual, that Chicago professor who agreed with some Muslim scholar? And they actually, I think maybe the Muslim scholar took one of his classes or something. And then I realized it was Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is the one that said that you can't allow a country to become a soft liberal democracy where it's run by consumerism. You need to introduce religion. You have to have values besides just consumption and production. And so for him, it was religion. Even though he recognized it as bullshit, factually it's bullshit, but you need to give people like noble values or heroic values or even pro-social values, because you're not going to get it from a system that just where the only reward is consumption and the only loss is production. So your work is alienating and then buying is depressing. And you'll be too soft to defend yourself in war. That was Rumsfeld. So Rumsfeld was a student, and Rumsfeld felt we need to have like a pro-war attitude, not only for the shareholders in these weapons companies, but for the populace. Otherwise, we'll get defeated by people that are actually convinced by some ideal. Because Americans aren't convinced by anything. We have nothing. We don't worship anything except, I guess, like obscene racism and belligerence. I mean, like Trump. We'll worship like disgusting blobs. It's like because we love a good con, and Americans are crazy. But for the rest of the planet, don't they need something besides comfort? And so it was just I guess I got lost on this Leo Strauss thing. So Steve, do you have any ideas about, speaking of I guess, I don't know, social engineering, or I mean, certainly as rational agents should be involved in the education of their children. I mean, shouldn't we be inculcating something besides soft self-pleasuring and in economics they talk about maximizing self-interest. So we're self-interest maximizers. We're buying to maximize. So it's all selfish and boring. And so that's why you have these rich white girls that are running off to Syria to get married to the Mujahideen, because they're so excited about the idea that anyone in the world believes in anything. So,
Yeah, I mean, if I had to think of an idea, we do have to have a belief system that trumps, pardon the pun, consumerism. It trumps us exploiting the resources of the planet. And look at nativist religions that have some sense of us being subservient to nature and also custodians of nature. What I see in what I read occasionally of American Indian mythology and philosophy, that is the sort of attitude you need. Buddhist is also relatively similar, though Buddhism is, a lot of Buddhist countries down here which are quite, like in Asia, Thailand being one, that are just wiping out the local environment to expand production because you're fighting away from poverty. But you need to get an attitude where we regard ourselves as custodians of life. That's first and foremost what humanity has to be. We claim to be the only intelligent species on this planet. We are certainly the only intelligent species on this planet with opposable thumbs. And so we can then, construct the world we've built around us. We have to see our role as preserving life on the planet.
We're going to have to put caps.
Ideology.
We're going to have to put caps on the nature of advertising, because it does occur to me that marketing is what creates like the self-pleasuring ideal. So you deserve this, you want this, you deserve this, and they're trying to create neediness and incompleteness and sickness so that you can consume things. So marketers are creating people that worship the idea of maximizing consumptive intake and being completely self-satisfied through purchasing. So there ought to be laws against creating selfish idiots.
Yeah, and like economics is built on the idea of selfish idiots. What they call the Ramsey model, which underlies all their growth models for climate change. They start with the idea of a utility maximizing household that is trying to maximize its utility through consumption over the infinite future. And all it has to do is make a decision between whether it works today, which means more investment, less consumption, or whether it consumes more today, which means less investment and more consumption, but a slower rate of growth. That's the ethical dilemma at the heart of neoclassical growth models. And we have to absolutely first and foremost say what we are trying to maximize is the survivability of the planet and the diversity of life on the planet. And that's first and foremost. And to do that, I think you do need something of a religious, spiritual belief system.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what I like. When you read, North American Indian philosophy, Koyaanisqatsi, et cetera, it comes across that way.
That's why I'm a big fan. I don't know if you've read any of Edward Wilson's work, but he has a project called Half Earth, and and he kind of built on this concept of consilience with William Ewell, who actually invented the word scientist, funny enough. But anyways, Edward O. Wilson, I think, is phenomenal on that front. And it's all about, protecting a biodiversity. We have, in terms of a religious comment, we have the Garden of Eden here. We are perfectly adapted for this planet, and we're contaminating it. And that's simply the way our biology works. It's adaptive to the environment, right?
Yeah. This I'm just showing my screen at the moment just to make that point. I mean, I'm aware of Wilson's work. I wasn't aware he's done that. I think this is exactly what we need, and maybe even like half Earth is at least being a feasible, realistic initial target for us. I think we might actually aim for 20% Earth and leave the other 80% for wild species. But yeah, something like this initiative, I think, is absolutely vital.
Yeah, he's kind of a hero of mine, anyways. The more I read of him, the more the more I really appreciate his work. A living legend, really, I think. But
yeah, I wasn't aware of this particular initiative, so I'm going to take a good look at it. But yeah, we have that has to be an ideology we all share, and then you then have the idea of both social construction and individual initiative and enterprise confined within that boundary. And the whole idea is if what you're doing isn't, if what you're doing goes against maintaining life on Earth, then you haven't got it right. Your project can't go ahead. So there has to be that awareness. That has to be and I don't think we're going to do it without going through a appalling period which scars us as a species and gives us a racial memory of what went wrong when we didn't obey this way of thinking. And that's
it's going to be hard to create this mindset in people that are just in business school and that are completely cynical, like these American politicians. What's his name? Matt Gaetz from Florida. Like what a scumbag. But I was thinking,
we pronounce that geek. Yeah, geek. Yeah, okay.
So, the Beatles were asked this question, and they thought that the only real feasible practical solution is to put LSD in the water supply. This would force people to have a psychedelic experience, recognize their dependency on the ecosystem, and have like a deep ecological insight where they realize, oh, I see. Life really isn't about like slashing the enemy and storing as much gold as possible. Really, I'm already interdependent. And I mean, there's emotions that are deep enough that they could trump the satisfaction of buying a new item.
And I think if we're going to have a sustainable society, we have to have that as its underpinning. And the trouble is, I don't think we're not going to get there by, again, this is like a paradigm shift, but now we're talking in terms of human philosophy. We're not going to have people who are currently promoting, go for growth, industrialization, development as the focus. That if there's any religion right now in the humanity species, that's it. They're not going to say, oh dear, we got that wrong. We've got to go back for sustainability and keeping life alive. It's not going to be the people in charge who make that decision now, and it won't be the ideology in charge that transitions towards that way of thinking. It will, and the only way I think it's going to happen is something which is so fucking scary that this becomes completely replaces the previous paradigm.
Yeah, like the fall of Rome, right? I mean, there was so much, civil progress, relatively speaking, and it had to be all ripped down. It had to be all dismantled, and we had to go backwards. If we're putting a direction on it. But yeah, we had to go into a little bit of a dark age there, before we could, see the light. And maybe that's where the new birth of the religion is actually, going to come from, and, just, I don't know. I think kind of a depressing talk tonight. Hey, I mean,
just having read, I'm sorry about that. I mean, I'm reading this stuff on a regular basis, and it's bloody hard to avoid becoming permanently depressed when you read nonsense like this and see, here's a bunch of economists that think it makes perfect sense to say that the temperature level that would 100% reduce GDP, that's obviously, I imagine they'd say that's when life on Earth ceases anyway. When there's no economy, there's no life, is 18 and 3/4 degrees above pre-industrial, when any sensible scientist would tell you that like 8 degrees or 10 degrees itself would be enough to wipe out life on the planet. And yet they publish this stuff and they can't even see the absurdity of what they write themselves. So I walk away and just, I'm just in a permanent state of shaking my head at the stupidity of intelligent people.
I have a general question that's related to this issue as a side effect, but it's my main deep question for Steve, which is, can you tell me what you think the ideal economic system would look like? Could you describe what the most sustainable, optimal, ethical, whatever, overall best economic system would be?
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's when we produce most of our material goods off planet, frankly, and where we've reduced population on the planet so much that we are not the major pressure on the ecology. So I'd see a population under 1 billion people where production occurred off planet and was dropped back on. This is the stuff that Amazon Bezos is supposedly working at Blue Origin, but he's fucking it up completely by using the same management techniques he used to build Amazon.
What kind of social productive arrangement? What would the mode of production be? How should humans organize their power and management in order to have the best possible economic system?
Well, the very first principle would be nature conservation and preservation and extension, the resilience of nature. We'd be custodians of nature. That'd be our custodians of life. That's the ideology would be, in that sense, nativist. Well, I don't know that that's a difficult. I can't think of a proper word for it right now. But something which said, first and foremost, we are custodians of life, and our role as humans is to ensure the continued existence of life on Earth, and then, where this is feasible, the extension of life through the rest of the universe, starting with our own solar system. That, to me, is the underlying. That would be the value system, and then within that, you'd have to say, well, that obviously involves constraints on how much of the Earth's resources can go to humans, and to even imagine, a lot of time for E.O. Wilson, definitely, but to imagine in the long term that that's 50% of the planet is too much, and therefore, how can we reduce our load on the planet so we leave the vast majority of it for the continued development and evolution of life within the bounds of the way we found the planet when we evolved as a species, which is the last 500,000 years, and in particular, as an industrial society, the last 10,000 years. And that's a return to the conditions of the Anthropocene. So
to get there, should we have a wage system in place? Should we have owners and producers? Should there be a commons where people get goods for free? How would you?
A universal basic income, I think, is inevitable. And that's one thing I was pleased to see Musk talking about at his AI day recently. Because a lot of my fellow lefty economists from modern monetary theory push the idea of a job guarantee. They're anti-universal basic income. I think ultimately we have to have a system that distributes a living income to every human, independent of whether they work or not. And then if you wish to achieve a higher standard, then you have to innovate somehow yourself, produce somehow yourself, but you've got to do that within the constraints of trying to maintain life on the planet. So part of what you could do to get more is to be an active custodian of life. The other extreme, you'd be an active participant in trying to extend our capacity to develop new technology. Okay, and so I still think you need something which promotes maximum innovation, but within the bounds of maintaining life is first and foremost the most important thing we can do. So you can't do that just through a market system. There has to be a central creation of money effectively, that is set up in such a way that it provides enough for everybody at a basic level, and then to go beyond it, you've either got to become a life enhancer or an ideas enhancer, and that involves a certain amount of market mechanism at one extreme, and a sort of social reward system at the other. Then you might get somewhere, but you've got to have both. I mean, you simply can't have the rapacious one we have now, that going out for maximum personal gain is what gets rewarded.
The canvas that we're on right now says digital canvas as participating in the idea market. Would you envision this world as being connected with the technology the way we are now, and this is possible? Yeah.
I mean, like one thing which the more that I see of our potential to destroy the sustainability of life on this planet, and how that's going to affect us. I mean, I'm not going to put a number on how many humans I think we could lose this century courtesy of destroying the stability of the climate. But an essential element that I want to see is preserving the knowledge we've gained. The amount of knowledge we've accumulated since the fossil fuel age began is incredible. And to think that we could actually lose that and go backwards and forget. I mean, the forgetting involves not being able to make technology. Okay, it isn't a case of, we can all write it down in a book. I'm sure, Elon Musk could write down in a book how to make a rocket, but if you don't actually have the machinery that makes a rocket, your knowledge is relatively lost. So I want to maintain that knowledge. That's more important, frankly, than maintaining him in life, is to maintain him in knowledge.
Computers will be helpful with that, because you could have three-dimensional models showing how the machines work. So that way, a really stupid civil, and it could be, I think Arthur C. Clarke would probably write something like this, where it would also include instructions as like remedial educational things in case we do go back to a cave type situation, where the people will be able to, it would even be instructions how to make sense out of the models inside the computer and all this.
Well, yeah, and also we've got so many technologies that look like we're just on the verge of being able to escape the damage we do to the biosphere. If we were 30 or 40 years further down the track now in terms of rocket technology and manufacturing technology, then we quite possibly could have robots in space mining asteroids, sending products back to the Earth, maybe using balloons to drop it down so you don't, not dumping any more carbon into the atmosphere. Population restraint, so we have a falling population over time. We're so close. At the same time, we're so close to wiping ourselves out and taking a large number of the species on the planet with us. It's it all feels like bloody the last 5 minutes of an episode of Star Trek, where it's either total annihilation or bang, we get through and it's time for the next episode. I'm just not too optimistic that we're going to, every Star Trek ends with a happy ending. No guarantee that's going to happen with us.
Well, as a funny side note, the Scientologists have taken care of the preservation of future information by putting everything L. Ron Hubbard's ever said and put it on titanium plates and buried it in canisters under a mountain somewhere in California, I think it is. It's a little funny little note there. So if everything is lost, one thing that will definitely survive are the words of L. Ron Hubbard written on titanium plates.
Oh, bloody hell. Just what we need, isn't it?
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. I do want to give one final plug for E.O. Wilson to anybody that's listening. His book, Half Earth, he's spent a lot of time, thinking about conservation and being a pioneer in this particular field. Have a look at it, Steve, and Scott as well. I hope he's really a good. He's a great scholar and a living legend. So until next time, do you guys have anything else that you want to add?
No, that'll do for one round.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Okay.
Bye all.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time.